I want to talk about the Lightning Network. I want to talk about your view on Bitcoin being, fast and cheap and potentially more private. But I want to start at the beginning because, like all of us, we were doing something else before Bitcoin. And I find your story really interesting, especially for this community of human rights activists who remember kind of like the wars over copyright and the open web. And I would love to hear you talk to us about that and talk to us a little bit about how that brought you to your Bitcoin journey.
Definitely. By the way, I was noting that my photo here is my avatar. So you can see the drawing of me that actually came from a community of open source advocates and activists. So I've always loved the internet, and it's hard to say exactly why, but remember as a kid, I got my first computer. I got on the internet. I remember my dad had access to the internet, and I was really excited to go over to his place and use it. And at one point, my mom even took away my modem, and this is going to date me. And then I went right back and bought another one. It was clogging up the phone line, yeah. So those are the early internet days. And for me, I think what was so fascinating about this was access to information and access to knowledge in a way that hadn't previously been possible. You could go to a library. I was lucky to grow up outside of New York City where I had access to that, but a lot of people around the world did not. But the idea, and today it's completely commonplace, right? It's ubiquitous, but to have access to that kind of information at your fingertips was actually revolutionary at the time and still is in many ways today. So fast forward, I had gotten interested in startups and technology, studied everything from international politics to actually internet law. And I got really interested in open source technology and the idea of internet freedom. And it was really great to hear Nick's talk around cypherpunks and everything that went on a little bit before my time with the cryptography movement. But the idea that technology can empower, and especially cryptography can empower people from things like, repression. It can enable people to have greater privacy, and it can bring greater freedom to people globally, was just completely fascinating to me. And I was always very interested in leveling the playing field and providing access and democratization. That word may be more of a cliche these days, but at the end of the day, the idea that the internet provides more opportunities for people is part of what made me so passionate about it. So in my pre-Bitcoin life, it's hard to imagine what life was like pre-Bitcoin. I was very involved in internet activism, open source technology, Creative Commons, and a variety of movements where people believed in the power of technology to provide greater freedom, provide greater access to information, open access to educational resources. Some folks may have heard of SOPA and PIPA, the Internet Freedom Movement. I helped activists organize around that in terms of internet censorship, did research as a grad student both on human rights areas and internet censorship areas. And lo and behold, open source technology and decentralized technology were very interesting to me. Open source because anybody could build upon it. It wasn't locked down. You didn't have walled gardens. And decentralization because I knew that if you have one government or one entity controlling a technology, they're going, power corrupts, right? They're going to either shut it down or restrict it. And we've seen this on many of the walled garden platforms we have out there today. And when I first learned about Bitcoin, I was actually after grad school. I studied law at Harvard Law and then taught at Stanford University and Yale, TA for the course and an article about Bitcoin. And I remember thinking oh, wow, open source money. This is really interesting. Will anybody ever use it? Lo and behold, here we are today. So I was very excited to see that people actually used it, and thus started my rabbit hole of just diving deeper and deeper into learning about this technology.
You mentioned that the relationship between the creator and the audience was something that really inspired you from kind of like your early days. Can you now trace your journey from that idea, that vision of people online being able to connect directly with their audience to what you're working on now at Lightning Labs?
Definitely. So I always wondered why on the internet there wasn't an easy way to just send value or money. So you can send a photo in any application today. It's interoperable. I have friends in Argentina and India. I can just send a photo in any application. Imagine if today you had to say, wait days and then use a different technology for a different country in order to send that photo. That's actually the way that we send, money or value on the internet today, right? It's wild. It's 2021. By the way, here in the US, we're using paper checks, which to me, we're like stuck in, the telegraph age of value transfer on the internet. So
but just on that, why do you think money has lagged behind everything else?
Well, here, there are different systems globally around the world. I think there are a lot of incumbents here in the US that are actually not incentivized to have a better system, a faster system, a more efficient system. But also globally, there are a lot of incumbents, and I've always taken a global perspective. I studied international related issues as well, did things like human rights, international relations, and there are global incumbents that make a lot of money when you send cross-border payments, right? They might charge 10 or 20% on a $100 payment. So it is not in their interest for the prices to go down. And I think we see a lot of that degree of, say, rent seeking, if you will. There's a whole concept of the innovator's dilemma. Clayton Christensen, incumbents are not going to create the technologies that actually render their technology, obsolete. That's just the way things work. So for me, I'd always wondered, why can't we transfer value on the internet in the way that we could send, say, photos? I also love music, trying to work on my DJ career for those that I've talked to lately. And I know we heard from DJ Switch earlier, which was an incredible talk. And the idea being that you're not able to easily send value or money to creators on the internet was something that inspired me. And then the global nature, always, wanting to travel around the world and learn about new cultures. This is not by any means a domestic problem. It is a global problem. And that also inspired me in meeting people through these open source communities that were working on this technology around the world was really interesting and got me involved.
So our session here is really the doorway for us to teach you about the Lightning Network. And before we get into that, I want to hear a little bit from you on the earlier days in Bitcoin when there was like a big fight over how Bitcoin was actually gonna operate. And there were kind of these two visions of people who were really focused on getting as many people as possible onto the network and to make transactions as fast and cheap as possible, but in doing so, sacrificing decentralization and user control. Whereas there were a bunch of other folks who said, no, we can actually do both. We can keep the user control and decentralization, and we can find a scientific way to scale Bitcoin. And you were definitely at the heart of that debate. And I'd love for you to just reveal some of that to the audience, because it's an overlooked period of Bitcoin's history in many ways, but it's so important, I think.
Yeah, there's one thing that the Bitcoin community loves, it's drama. For those that have been on Twitter, I will warn you, there's some drama out there, but the drama comes out of passion, I would say, and people that deeply believe in what they're doing. Now, there are certain people that deeply believe in a very different vision than a lot of us here today. And it's funny, by the way, that now the block size wars, as we call them, are the old days. Right. I'm like, what year is it anymore? 2021? Who knows? So yeah, at its core, there were differing visions within, I would say there were two communities. One was more composed of, say, developers and people that actually have worked on the technology for a while and maybe were more grassroots. And then there was another, it's interesting because there are a variety of other approaches. Some of them are more corporate. In fact, there was a proposal for a change to Bitcoin. We call it a hard fork. And that means it's not backward compatible. There's another type of change to Bitcoin. We're having one in November, or it's getting activated, called a soft fork. That one's called Taproot, that is backward compatible.
And just to color that for you, what that would mean is a hard fork is like when Microsoft just updates your computer, or Apple just updates your computer and you have no choice. Whereas with the soft fork, you get to decide when to update. And this is very important.
Well, you could not update, but then you're splitting off with a hard fork.
Right. But in a soft fork, you could just choose to not update. And
exactly. And it's compatible. Exactly. So there were different communities that had a different vision for Bitcoin. And what they wanted to do was essentially scale Bitcoin at the base layer. So folks here are familiar with the term blockchain, right? And that is what I think of as like the TCP/IP, if there are any internet geeks in the room, but the base layer of Bitcoin. And the idea at that point was, well, we can actually just, if you think of Bitcoin as, say, a highway, we'll add more lanes to the highway, right? And more and more and more. But unfortunately, what that meant is, and why Bitcoin is so powerful, is you have this element of decentralization combined with global consensus. And one of the key elements there is, as we know, nobody controls Bitcoin. You know, there's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no marketing department, no corporations, no governments. And that's what makes it extremely powerful. In fact, from a geopolitical standpoint, I don't know how much we're going to talk about mining, I'm sure later. The idea that you have the miners that are securing the Bitcoin network in all different jurisdictions is part of what's so key to enable Bitcoin security and ultimate success. So at the same time, you have what are called full nodes. And that concept is these are users that are running these nodes kind of like a server that are actually checking the rules of the network and ensuring that this consensus, that everyone is agreeing on the state of the network. And that's very important for the security of Bitcoin as well. And so if you add more lanes to this highway, ultimately what ends up happening is it ends up being harder to run these nodes because it actually takes up more space. So you're adding more space to each what we call block. And then it's actually harder for people. Let's say you're in a low power place, let's say a village in Nigeria, and you don't have a great internet connection and you want to be able to run your own node, have that degree of self-sovereignty that we've heard about. And you may not have access to the internet, you're not on a super high-speed connection. Adding more space is going to make it harder for you to run that node. It's going to limit the decentralization of the network and the number of people that can do so.
Right. So the overall philosophy of what were called the big blockers, or the people who wanted to add a lot more lanes, would have eventually led to essentially what we would call data center Bitcoin, where you would essentially need specialized equipment, and it would hurt the democratization idea, and it would hurt the idea that anybody could be a full first-class citizen of Bitcoin, right? Like
exactly.
Only a handful of people would have control over the servers, and therefore it would be no real different from a centralized technology. And what are we doing here in the first place? Or at least I'm very biased, of course, but that's my view of it. There are people who obviously disagree with me.
Everyone has an opinion in Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, one analogy I've said in the past is, in order to run a full node, to download all the prior blocks and all the prior transactions of Bitcoin, it's as if in order to send an email, you had to download every email that anybody has ever sent. But again, that's what ensures that you're secure and in consensus with the network. So you have, 100,000 people around the world running these nodes, which is actually critically important to the security of the network. So,
right. Like there's no Amazon web server like controlling Bitcoin. It's literally
right. I mean,
like
some people run nodes on
people.
AWS, but
sure.
The thing is, you can run nodes, so there's this really cool project. We heard about a few of them actually. One is called Umbrel, another one's called Start9, another one's called Raspberry Blitz, where people use Raspberry Pi devices. Yes. So these are, cheap. You can buy them, you can run them in low power environments, and they run their own nodes. And there's there are numerous movements of people also running Lightning nodes, which we'll get to. And this is very much about being a part of the community and self-sovereignty to them. So to quickly get to the drama, so there was one group that wanted bigger blocks, and then there was another part of the group that wanted decentralization, and they said, hold on one second. We need to make sure that these blocks are not too big so that you can have a decentralized network, and we should build transactions on a higher layer, a second layer, which is part of what I'm working on, Lightning, on top of Bitcoin, so that not every transaction occurs on the blockchain. Because in fact, Bitcoin today can only do about 5 to 10 transactions per second, and this is intentional, because if you had many transactions on the base layer of the blockchain, you would have centralization. Instead, you take those transactions, you make them at a higher layer, one layer on top of it, and you don't need the global consensus on that higher layer. In fact, you can go onto the Bitcoin blockchain with one transaction. You get onto Lightning, the layer 2 that I'm involved in, and I know we have many community members here today, and then you can transact, say, an unlimited amount of times on Lightning, and it doesn't require the global consensus that everyone agrees upon. Instead, we call it local consensus. You actually agree with the people with whom you're transacting, and then you can route through other nodes on the network. If people are familiar with packets on the internet, transactions travel on Lightning like packets. So that is a very different approach. And it's saying, let's abstract these transactions to a higher layer. By the way, it also means you have amazing scalability, many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. The fees are also much lower because the fees on the Bitcoin blockchain are such that it's demand-based. So the more people that want to transact, and there's a limited number of transactions that can occur, the higher the fees go. So let's say you want to send a couple of dollars, you may be priced out. And then you also have the instant nature of transactions on Lightning. I know we're going to hear a lot more about it in the workshop afterward, as opposed to the 10-minute block time on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is also there for a reason. It's there so that people around the world that are running these nodes, we can have what we call block propagation. They can actually download the new blocks and it'll stay in consensus.
Yeah, I like the idea of thinking about money in layers, right? And it's not a perfect analogy, but it'll be helpful for you to like start to center your thinking, would be to think about the transition from gold money to paper money, right? So you had gold where like you literally had this bare asset that you had to like drive around and be really secure with, and maybe hire people with guns to protect you as you moved your gold from one place to another. So people were like, screw that, we're just gonna actually trade paper promises to gold. And that birthed the cash movement, right? Now, those pieces of paper didn't have the same assurances as the gold, but they were good enough for commerce, right? And that allowed humanity to scale at a massive rate. In Bitcoin, it's really interesting because you have the digital gold, the Bitcoin itself, and then you have Lightning, but Lightning doesn't even make those same trade-offs that cash does. It's actually real Bitcoin that you're moving back and forth. So that's what Elizabeth and her team are working on. And the global impact that we're talking about here is the fact that with Lightning, you can use Bitcoin in a way that's instant and essentially almost virtually no fees. And that's really helpful in emerging markets where people like eventually just won't be able to afford, using the main chain. So what is, you've been talking a lot about this idea of like number of users go up instead of number go up, meaning just the price. How does your background and your approach in Lightning color your philosophy there?
I like to create counter memes, but we can get to that in a second. So Bitcoin's first killer app, or the real first product market fit or use case that many folks may be familiar today, is the idea of Bitcoin, the asset. We heard about it in Togo and a variety of other places. And that idea was you buy this thing and it's kind of like a savings account and you hold it for a while. And, the idea is the number goes up, the price goes up. And, there's something interesting to that as well. But for me and for what I'm really passionate about with Lightning, the concept is number of people go up. Let's bring this technology to billions of people, provide them access, and provide them with, opportunities and use cases they previously would not have had. And so this is actually what we like to call Bitcoin, the monetary network, right? So Bitcoin, the asset, travels over Bitcoin, the monetary network. And, Bitcoin, the monetary network, needs the asset for it really to work. And there are all these incentive structures around mining and what we call the block reward. Miners earn Bitcoin to mine. So Bitcoin, the monetary network, is actually only 3 years old, which is pretty wild. 3rd January 2009 was the launch of Bitcoin, the asset and Bitcoin's base layer blockchain. But when it comes to instant high volume, low fee transactions on Lightning, the mainnet versions of the Lightning implementations, which interoperate on the protocol, launched in 2018. And the first year was, developers, command line. It was quite early, and we have an incredible group of developers and entrepreneurs here today that are going to talk to us about what they built on Lightning. But part of what's so key and something I'm really passionate about, we've had a lot of rich folks talk about, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I created a counter meme there, Bitcoin for billions, not billionaires, and the idea that this technology can empower so many people globally and emerging markets is key to that. And what we've seen really happen, I'd say in the past, 3 to 6 months. So for example, there are a lot of incredible entrepreneurs globally that are building on Lightning because of the low fees, because of the instant nature of the transactions. Lightning enables this kind of World Wide Web or HTTP application layer for Bitcoin, so developers can build on it. So we saw the video from Bernard, wish he could be here, from BitNob, who's launched Lightning in Nigeria and Ghana. There's an incredible group called Ibex Mercado out of Guatemala. They're also operating in El Salvador. Galoy has built the Bitcoin beach wallet in El Zonte. We have a company called OpenNode that is working with a number of merchants, McDonald's included, Starbucks now, I believe Ibex. Apparently, by the way, Lightning is big at Pizza Hut in El Salvador because, Bitcoiners love pizza and to spend Bitcoin for pizza. There's even a Bitcoin pizza day. And we've seen these really incredible groups of developers just building solutions for their local communities. Globally, we have Paul here from Stackwork and Sphinx. They have communities in Latin America and the Philippines where people are earning Bitcoin. So some people say, by the way, why would I want to spend Bitcoin? Well, here in the US, it's not hard to do a lot of things that globally, people may not have access to. But they also don't realize that earning it is key. And who doesn't want more Bitcoin, right? So a lot of people have been earning it, and then they can convert it to their local fiat currency if need be. But Lightning and Bitcoin provide the rails for people to both send and receive in a way that would not be previously possible in markets that weren't previously possible. And I know we'll also hear from Zebedee and Andre. The gaming community has gone wild for Bitcoin and Lightning. There was a really cool tweet a couple weeks back about gamers in Brazil who are earning more over Lightning playing games than they would, for their monthly salary, right? So you can be a gamer and actually earn a living doing it.
There's this concept of basically like neobanks or like new financial institutions that might resemble the current ones we have, but instead of connecting to each other with these kind of like SWIFT payment networks or banking system payment networks that are ultimately controlled by whoever the most powerful government in the region is, they're going to run on Lightning. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you see this unfolding. We're starting to see it happen now, right? Like there's companies like Twitter that are now allowing users, fully controlled. Like, if you have a Strike account in Twitter, it's KYC, it's KYC, it's paired with your identity, it's custodial, you don't actually control it. But anyone in the world can connect to you via this open monetary network. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you see this going, like in terms of maybe the institutionalization of Lightning, or is that maybe the wrong term? Or
well, I think key to this technology is, as mentioned, it's open, it's interoperable, and anybody can build upon it. And we heard earlier, this can be used for good, but also we can't stop people from using it that we don't want to use it. But at the end of the day, I believe, the good far outweighs the bad. And the number of passionate community members and developers that really believe in this future has been incredible. By the way, there was a really cool campaign called Bitcoin Smiles, if people have heard about it, in El Salvador, where funds were raised over, on-chain Bitcoin and Lightning, and the majority of the transactions coming over Lightning to provide dental care for community members in El Salvador that couldn't afford it otherwise, which I thought, these are Bitcoiners that just did this as a project because they care and because they want to help the local communities. And to me, operating through the traditional system, that campaign would not have been possible in the way that they did it for Bitcoin Smiles. But to get to your question around institutions, so right now we have a lot of startups building on Bitcoin and building on the Lightning Network, hundreds of folks, 600 or more open source projects that people are building. We have like 6,000 developers in a Slack community as well. Those are the first movers, but we're seeing the larger incumbents take note. And this is often the case when it comes to new technology. Bernard Bitnob spun up Lightning in a matter of weeks. We were just like, whoa, like we're really impressed by these teams, but we're seeing larger people take note. And at the end of the day, because this is open and interoperable, everyone will want to talk to each other. So I do envision that you'll have, a variety of these new financial institutions, neobanks, operating over Lightning because it will make so much sense. You also have the use case of fiat to Lightning to fiat. So we heard about Paxful, and then we also heard about the application called Strike. And people are actually able to go from their local fiat currency through the Lightning Network to, say, send remittances home, maybe US dollars to Lightning to, say, Naira in Nigeria or something through these peer-to-peer payments. And Lightning and Bitcoin operate as what I call a protocol for value, the ability to send money, but also do instant conversions in those cross-border use cases. And if I were both something like Visa, we saw examples of people paying in Starbucks in El Salvador using Lightning for 0.05 of a cent of a fee. I would be scared. And then also, cross-border payments, Western Union, we have people paying, for virtually no fees cross-border without physically having to go places. It's better for security, it's cheaper, it's faster, and is providing a lot of these new opportunities.
Yeah, two just thoughts on that. Friends of ours in Nigeria built this thing called SendCash, and using Bitcoin, it means that anybody here with value in your phone can send money through the SendCash app, and then in minutes, like Naira, the local currency in Nigeria, gets deposited in that person's Nigerian bank account. Now, again, it's kind of like a halfway cypherpunk meets kind of the existing system, but it wouldn't be possible without Bitcoin. Like it needs the open monetary network to make it work. And you do this without any fees. So anyone now can send money directly to anyone's bank account in Nigeria through this app with no fees. The average remittance or payment sent from abroad to Nigeria, costs something like $7 or 8%. Okay, so we're talking about potentially saving meaningful percentages of countries' GDP by migrating to a better, more innovative, and forward-looking financial system. So this is one of the reasons I think both of us are quite passionate about this. I also just wanted to throw out one other metaphor for the crowd that I thought helpful in my understanding of Lightning. You have your Wells Fargo account, right? Okay, fine. So the US government knows exactly how much money's going in, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have an ATM and you can withdraw it. And now all of a sudden it's not digital, but it's freedom money. You could do whatever you want with it and they don't really know what's going on. And around the world, in a lot of emerging market countries, the cash economy is actually quite important because it protects people from the dictatorship, essentially. So now we have this idea of doing this in digital form with Lightning. You might have your Paxful account, which again, the government might know everything about, but then you might just withdraw into Lightning, and then all of a sudden you're part of this open monetary network. So I love this idea.
By the way, but what happens when the currency in the cash economy is devalued? Or, right. Certain bills are just taken out of circulation, or lots of, money's being printed. So
cash was always good as a privacy tool, but it never fixed the issue of, debasement. I mean, you could always get debased. So now we have something that fights both, which is pretty great.
And one of the really interesting things that we're seeing in emerging markets is, a lot of people have access to smartphones. They may not, in El Salvador, 20 to 30% of the population has access to traditional financial systems, but a much larger proportion of the population has access to a smartphone.
2/3 use social media.
Exactly. So, we see this. We've had some really cool Twitter spaces. Some of the people in the room participated on, say, Bitcoin and Lightning in West Africa. And, hearing about the ability to really leapfrog over the existing system that has these incumbents that charge these super high fees. You have this rent seeking. And with access to a phone, and we're going to hear about this in the workshop, you now can participate in this open, permissionless monetary network that anybody can build upon that's interoperable, unlike our existing banking and financial system. If I'm a developer and I want to build on top of that, good luck. And it's not actually going to talk to other countries around the world.
I just wanted you to give the opportunity to kind of give your pitch here to the audience. Again, these are policymakers, activists from different industries. A lot of them haven't thought much about Bitcoin, and even if they have, they maybe don't know what Lightning is. How would you recommend they kind of start thinking about this and approaching this in the coming months and years?
So it's really incredible to speak to a group of human rights activists and people that care about these issues. As somebody that was motivated to work on this technology for its open global nature, democratization, and providing access to people globally around the world. I have a friend, a guy named George from Bitfury, and he tweeted a couple months back about how people that have experienced repression and governments taking their money away or seizing their funds understood Bitcoin inherently, right? And, here in the US, that might not have been something that we have experienced as much, but there are so many people globally around the world that have, had accounts blocked, governments cracking down, activists unable to, receive funds, being surveilled. And the way that I think people should approach this is what the internet has done for aiding activism, for getting information out there online, for connecting people. Bitcoin and Lightning will do for access to financial services and the ability to build on top of this technology by making it more open, making it freer, and making it permissionless. And to me, there's a saying in the community, fix money, fix the world. And sure, there are many other problems in the world. But this is such a key part of enabling people to have greater freedom, to enable, people to be activists, to clamp down on repressive governments. I believe we will see authoritarian regimes topple because of this technology. And I welcome that. I await it. And to me, Bitcoin and Lightning are going to be a key part of that and are going to bring greater freedom to the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Lit. Thank you.